Hello and welcome back to the third rail. If this is your first visit, this channel revolves around my collection of Märklin models made in the 1980s. I run these on temporary layouts, and a brief look at the current one should quickly reveal that I don't belong to a brigade I would call everything prototypical or nothing. Basically, I collect and I play. This doesn't prevent me from trying to assemble trains that are as close to the real thing as possible as far as compositions are concerned. To do this, I usually turn to old pictures for inspiration, then pick matching items from the collection, and I must say the result rarely disappoints. The effect achieved is much closer to reality than one would have expected from models of this age. This shouldn't be the case, at least according to statements that are often regurgitated these days. Apparently, we have never been as fortunate as now in terms of variety of choice and realism. This is not wrong, especially in terms of choice. However, a large amount of new releases are not new products but reissues based on existing tooling, more often than not decades old, pimped up with an updated livery and minor detail tweaks. So 40 years ago, things might not have been actually that bad after all. Ever since the introduction of HO scale, Märklin had always aimed to stay close to what was happening on the real railways, and the product catalogue was quite up to date in terms of contemporary prototypes and liveries. Well, as long as it was German, of course. The concept of modelling something older, it wasn't yet called era back then, that only took off in the 1970s. A trend Märklin responded to with an increasing number of product lines from the middle of the decade onwards. Some of the tooling introduced at the time and during the 1980s is still used today for new releases. Despite the assumed limitations, a lot of looks can be achieved with models from the period, and quite realistically at that, even by today's standards. I dare say this might even make them suitable for use with new releases, without provoking stomach cramps as heavy as the most anally inclined or otherwise misinformed might assume. All this, of course, at an affordable price. Model trains in general, and Märklin specifically, were never cheap, but it certainly feels like this aspect is on a lot of people's minds at the moment. So today we will do a little bit of time traveling based on a few pictures and see what the collection has in store for us. But before we set off, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe and alert button before leaving today. Super thanks are also available if you feel the content deserves it. Whatever the option you choose will be much appreciated. Many thanks in advance. Now on to our topic. From its very first day in 1949, the Deutsche Bundesbahn had a steep hill to climb. The 1950s were about re-establishing links between major economic centres, in order to get everything needed to produce steel, as well as passengers, on the move again. From the late 1950s to the late 1970s, it was electrification and dieselization, I use this term between quotes, and the 1980s and the 1990s were all about high-speed rail and a little side project called German reunification, of course. This is what makes the evolution of the railways in West Germany between 1945 and the early 1990s so interesting. If we just look at the withdrawal of steam engines, the process took over 30 years. It would be even 50 if you included East Germany. The arrival of new engines was not necessarily followed by withdrawals, and a complex dance ensued consisting of numerous regroupments or reallocations between depots across West Germany. Over time, engines often ended up being used for radically different purposes than originally intended. A good example is this picture of a BR-44, which would be a heavy freight locomotive, in front of a passenger train in the early 1970s. What's going on here? During the same period, you could still see the class do what it did best, for example here in Wuppertal, in front of a heavy lime or cement train. Wuppertal and the entire Rhine-Ruhr metropolitan area are quite interesting in terms of railways, as these were instrumental to the development of the region. Wuppertal was even home to the oldest railway direction in Germany. We have a dense population, plenty of heavy and other industries, a bit of agriculture even, a location at the intersection of several international trade routes. Topographically, it is far from flat, as it is squeezed between the Bergisches Land to the east and the Rhine River to the west. Given the importance of the region and its key role in the German economy, it is served by an expansive railway network covering every scenario imaginable. It is probably the area of the country where the Bundesbahn was the busiest until the development of high-speed rail. I'd even dare say that everything the Bundesbahn had to offer was in service in the region at some point. So it is always a good area to refer to when searching for a specific bit of information or simply some inspiration. The region was extensively bombed during World War II, leaving little more than a pile of rubble by 1945. Here's a picture of the Krupp factory in Essen taken that year. And here's an aerial photograph of Wuppertal main station. It was still called Elberfeld at the time. There is not a single roof left intact on any of the buildings surrounding the station. After the war, the first efforts consisted in clearing the rubble and getting the main lines up and running, a task the Bundesbahn took on during the decade after its creation. The pre-war BR-01 and 03 were once again on the move in the area. But people also needed to go to work, which required secondary or branch lines. There, the situation was very much a matter of cobbling everything that had wheels together. Here we can see a BR-86, which would have been a freight locomotive originally, in front of Prussian slam-door coaches, among others. It is about to leave Elberfeld in 1957. And we can still see the war damage on the roof canopy. Now let's try and make something like that. So I got some Prussian slam-door coaches of the Deutsche Bundesbahn out. They are model numbers 4200, 4201, 4202 and 4203, released in 1986 and 1987. And for the locomotive I picked a 3096, from the early 1970s here, because it doesn't have lamp arches like the loco on the picture. This is not a defect. The first version, or maybe versions, came out like that. Arches were added on later editions of the model. Nice little consist, isn't it? And the short couplings add a little je ne sais quoi to it. Beautiful. Now, on these lines, turnaround times was of the essence. In the pre-war years, multiple units had been rolled out in the area. Some of their pilot cars were recycled and paired with ex-Wehrmacht shunters on smaller lines, as you can see on this picture taken in 1950. On busier lines, a solution was implemented using 50-year-old BR-78s, the queen of the commuter line, and 1920s Donnerbüchsen. Some of them were modified to become pilot cars. The controls were only semi-automatic. They worked a bit like those you'd find in a ship. So It wouldn't have saved on board personnel so much, but this definitely speeded up operations with the elimination of maneuvering. Now, there were no such pilot cars in the Märklin program in the 80s, and maybe only one or two since then as part of some box sets, I think. But we can still aim for the look. There we are. We have a BR78, which is a model number 3106, and a few 4100 and 4101 Donnerbüchsen from the early 1980s. I think it was 84 or 85. So we're going to push these as well here. Now, if you wanted short couplings, these models were reissued in the early 1990s with different chassis under reference number 4313 and 4314. And I think they are still being made today. The V-36 and pre-war pilot cars we saw earlier were soon replaced by VT-95 units, which arrived in Wuppertal in the early 50s. Look at all these people cheering. That would be the classic 3016 and 4018. They are a bit crude, but let's indulge in a bit of nostalgia. Now the trailer should be lit, but the light fitting is broken in this one. Now they're actually closer to scale than people think. I think people often confuse them with the VT-98s that came out later and which are longer. Let's watch this one for a bit. Gorgeous. They should bring a few memories back. Now, meanwhile, the Bundesbahn was trying to improve the conditions commuters were subjected to. The budgets were very tight, so the chassis of old Prussian Slamdor coaches were recycled to produce Umbauwagen, that would translate to conversion or converted coaches or refurbished coaches. And these started to appear in Wuppertal too around that time. Here is Wuppertal-Elberfeld station again. Half the roof has gone now, as it needs to make way for catenary. We have a little curve, look, waiting to take some rubble away. And a BR78 with a few Umbauwagen lower down. The year is 1963, and the Umbauwagen have been in service for a few years already. And here's a more detailed shot of such a consist in the area at the time. So, here is our old friend again, the 3106, but with Umbauwagen this time. They are 4067, 4079 and 4080, which stayed in the catalogue for decades. So we are going to pool these. Like the Donnerbüchsen earlier, this tooling was reused on different chassis in the 1990s, with reference number 4317 to 4319. They were made all the way until 2012. Now these would be the ones to choose if you wanted short couplings. Right, it's time for another picture. We are still in 1963. But a few months later, and the canopy in Elberfeld has been demolished. The engine you see on the left is a BR03. Nice picture. Around that time, the situation improved a bit more for passengers. Enter the Säuberlich. You could have seen something like that initially. This is a push-pull combination with a pilot Säuberlich and some Umbauwagen. Now that picture was taken near Hamburg, but let's assume this type of things happened in the Ruhr too. Let's go this artistic license, I'd like to see how it looks. So, here's our friend again, I have taken a Umbauwagen away and I've replaced it with a pilot Säuberlich. Now that's an old 4077 released in 1980. And here we can see the limitation of older template coaches. The proportions in comparison with the Umbauwagen are not the best, but I'd say this train still looks the part. But a full contingent of Säuberlichs would look much better. Here is Elberfeld again in 1964, and the line has now been electrified. At the bottom of the picture we can see a push-pull consist made of Säuberlich and a BR78 again. It won't die. So now we have 4077, 82 and 83 on the track. It's another classic combination, released in 1979-80. And I think that looks much better. Now in the mid-60s, a few diesels finally arrived and started to take over from the BR78s, the legendary V100s. So it's time to get the legendary 3072 out. Bye bye 3106. As with the original, this model is a real workhorse. Nice little thing. Have I said that in the video already? Anyway, in the mid to late 60s, the ETA 150, later known as BR515, appeared in the area. Now that's a German specialty that had been going on for decades at the time. As far as the technology is concerned, it's a battery-operated rail bus, basically. They were plugged in overnight and then went on doing their business during the day. Now I have a red version that Märklin did. It's a 3076, but it's broken. It's been on my shelf of maybe I'll do something with it for a few years now, maybe even more than 10 or 15 years. But in the early 1970s, these units received the beige-blue color scheme, and I have one of these too. And here it is with its pilot car. I really like this model. And it's been quite a few years since it was last on the track too. In real life, they weren't great in cold weather, and sometimes they needed a bit of help. This picture here shows such a situation. We are in the mid-70s now. Now, at the time, the Säuberlichs got updated. There was a slight color tweak and also new pilot coaches. I might be wrong, but I think it's called the Karlsruher Kopf, this type of pilot coach. But I'm not sure. Here is our V100 again, but it's now called a 212, with coaches 4255, 56 and 57, released in 1989. These are the same as model numbers 4159, 58 and 60, released in 1983. The difference is the chassis, with the newer ones equipped with short couplings. In the late 1970s, electric traction also became a thing for this type of traffic. Enter the BR111, the jack of all trades, in S-Bahn livery. Now we have the same coaches, but the model is now the 3155. It was also available in 3655. Certainly looks different. But these electric shenanigans didn't mean the end of diesel. The 212 was still in service by the end of the 80s, and it received a new dress. Now we can make this consist too. The locomotive is a double 347, released in 1989. The coaches are the same. Now this is the first time this one gets out on the track too. Now in the 80s the S-Bahn reached Wuppertal too, and with a new type of coaches called the X-type coaches. So we have our S-Bahn BR111 again on the track, and the coaches are coach number 4183, 84 and 85. And all of these have closed couplers. I can't remember exactly when they were released, but it's sometimes, I think, 86 to 88, maybe 89. In the 80s anyway. Lovely matching consist. Now at the time the rail buses were still going strong, and they remained in service until the mid-90s in the area, but their replacement was on the horizon. The class 6 to 8 was slowly appearing in various parts of the network and closing Wuppertal slowly but surely. One was presented in Essen in 1988 during a little special event. That's another beautiful picture. And I have a model of one of those here, released by Märklin in 1989. That's model 3676 here. God, this thing is absolutely ugly. Now the 6 to 8 would only make it to Wuppertal in the course of the next decade, maybe even the early 2000s. But that's now another story. Right, this is the end of our little journey. Maybe I could have called it a mini history of commuting in the Bundesbahn days. We'll have a few more exotic scenes from Wuppertal through the ages to conclude this installment. But to recap, today we have seen, I think, about 14 or 15 types of coaches in combination with 5 locomotives, spanning a period of 40 years as far as the prototypes are concerned. Are they the latest and greatest? No, but these coaches can easily be found on the second-hand market and don't break the bank, yet they still look good today. All it takes is the ability to make compromises. Any realized savings could be put towards tools and supplies to pimp them up, maybe with some interior lighting or a bit of weathering, or even experiment on a first layout in order to gain experience and avoid some pitfalls when the time finally comes to build a dream layout that may have been in the planning for years. Food for thoughts. For now, thank you very much for spending time with me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, hopefully enough for you to give it a like, maybe subscribe if you haven't already done so, or even send a super thanks my way if you feel the video was worth it. Thanks as ever for your support, and bye for now.